Good morning, everyone in the Pacific time zone, and good afternoon, everyone that is in the Mountain time zone. Thanks for joining us today for this Cultivating Success webinar, Funding for Farmers, that's talking about the Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education Producer Grant Program. I'm Colette D. Phelps, and I'm one of your presenters today. The other presenter is Lauren Golden, and Lauren is an extension educator in Blaine County, so in south central Idaho. I am also an extension educator, and my area is community food systems. I'm located in North Idaho in Moscow. So before we jump into today's topics, I just wanted to give you a second to go over some webinar tips and maybe make some adjustments to your computer. So if you could please close all of the other programs that are running on your computer, this is really going to maximize your experience today and help you be able to direct all your bandwidth to the webinar. If you would like to check your sounds, if you're experiencing any problems with clarity, speed, or any types of blips in your sound, then you might want to switch to the phone. Your welcome email had a call-in number that you could use, and if you do switch to the phone, you'll want to mute your computer sound so that you don't get feedback. If you could take a second to find the question pane, which is in the dashboard, which is for most people is going to be on the right-hand side of your computer. You can type questions for the speakers into that pane anytime throughout the webinar. We have several places where we're going to stop and do a bit of Q&A. If you also are having any problems with the sound or viewing the screen, please type into that question box and we'll be able to help you out. There are 3 handouts for today's webinar. They are available also within your dashboard. There's a line that says handouts. One of the handouts is a copy of the slides from today's presentation. So you'll be able to print that. You don't need to write down all this information. The other 2 handouts are copies of the 2 calls for proposals that we're going to be talking about from Western SARE. So you can download those onto your computer at any time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into talking about the Western SARE Producer Competitive Grants Program. And today we're going to talk about 2 specific calls that were designed to serve producers on their farms and ranches. One is called the Farmer Rancher Research and Education Call, and the other is Professional Plus Producer Research and Education. So it'll help us to know a little bit more about all of you who are on the call today and where you're located and some of your background. So we have a couple of polls. And if you've been on one of our webinars before, you've actually seen these polls and you know how they run. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll. Let's see, just taking a sec to launch. Thank you for your patience. So you should see our first poll. And with this, you can just check. We'd like to know how long you've been farming or if you are a technical assistance provider. Okay, great. We've had 75% of the people that are on have participated, now 100. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So as you can see, about 25%, so a quarter of our people are just planning to farm. 50% are already beginning farmers with 1 to 10 years experience and 25% with over 10 years experience. So thanks for sharing. We have a second poll that we'd also like to run. And That's asking where you're located, whether you're in North Idaho, Southwest Idaho, Central Idaho, Southeast Idaho, or out of the state. So I'll go ahead and launch that poll. You can let us know where you're located. %50 of the folks have voted, 75, now 100. Let's look at those results. So half of our participants are in North Idaho today, a quarter in Central Idaho, and a quarter in Southeast Idaho. So that's great. Thank you for joining us. So Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program is actually a USDA program. And this program is a little bit different than some of the other USDA programs because it was mandated to not do business as usual. So departing from that, it really looks at the ideas and the priorities for the education and research really coming from farmers. And to establish that those priorities are coming from farmers, farmers are required to be involved in all of the grant proposals from start to finish. That means the planning, design, implementation, and outreach from any SARE-funded research or education program. And in addition to this is a unique program in USDA because it's specifically looking at sustainable agriculture, and it's designed to promote good stewardship of natural resources, enhance the quality of life of both producers and of rural communities, protect the health and safety of the people involved in food and farming systems, promote crop and livestock diversification, and also economic diversification through different enterprises on the farm, and really understanding the environmental implications of different sustainable ag practices and systems. So in putting together grant proposals for this program, it's important to make sure that your proposals are enhancing sustainable agriculture as a whole. The USDA does have a definition of sustainable agriculture that you see on your screen in front of you. And they see sustainable agriculture as an integrated system of plant and animal production practices that are site-specific. And this doesn't mean that you have to have a farm that both has plants and livestock on that particular farm. You might be looking at the soil organisms as one of your animals within your farming system. But they are really looking at integrated, holistic production, looking at the farm as a system and understanding how the farm works in terms of the piece of land that you're on and interacts with the larger environment, both the human and the physical environment. And within that, we're looking at this three-legged stool that we talk about in sustainable agriculture, that it's environmentally sustainable, it's ecologically sustainable, and then it's also sustainable in terms of quality of life for the people that are involved in the food and farming system. SARE also has a definition of whether or not you're a producer. And so to apply for any of their producer grants or to be a partner and be recognized as a producer, you either have to, yes?
Colette, sorry to interrupt. I just want to say on my screen, I don't see these slides anymore. I'm not sure if it's just my end.
Oh, okay. So does anybody else have a problem seeing the slides? So Denise Wetzel says that she's not seeing them as well. Now are you seeing them?
Yes.
So when did you stop seeing them?
Maybe about just a slide ago. So.
Okay. So this slide, perhaps?
Yes.
Okay, so I apologize about that, everyone. I'm not sure why it jumped off of the slides. Technology is a mystery to me some days. And so thanks for letting me know that it jumped. And again, these slides are all in the handout that's on your computer. So I'm sorry that it jumped off of them. So this is SARE's definition of sustainable agriculture. And then now you should see the next slide that's the definition of a producer. And definitely, if you see that happen again, please jump in and let me know, Lauren. So according to Sarah, you're a producer if your primary occupation is farming and ranching and you have a farm or ranch tax ID number, or you're a part-time producer and you have at least $1,000 of documented annual income from your farming operation. So to be able to qualify for these grant programs, you need to be able to substantiate you're a producer with these criteria. So are there any questions about Sayre's definition of sustainable agriculture or Western Sayre's definition of being a producer? Does timber count? I believe that timber does count. In other USDA programs, timber and fisheries both count within the definition of sustainable agriculture. And last year in Washington, a farmer rancher grant was funded that was looking at shellfish. So I believe that yes, timber does count as an agricultural crop, and I would suggest that you definitely check that out with the SARE program officer. And at the end of this slide set, we're going to show you that website where you can look at that, but I believe timber does count. Lauren, would you concur that timber does count?
Yes, timber is an agricultural product, so yes, it counts.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, super, we'll move forward. So we wanted to get a little bit of understanding if you have any experience applying for grant funds. So we have another poll, and we would like to know which, if any, grant funds you've applied for in the past. And so this could also be cost share funding through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Let's see. Okay, we've had 100% of people voted, and I'll share the results. So we have one person that has applied for a nonprofit organization grant, and then we have several people that have not applied for any grants. So that's really helpful to know. So thank you. And then we have another question about whether or not you have received or been part of a Western SARE producer grant as a collaborator. So I'll launch that poll. Okay. So to date, nobody has been part of a program. So that helps us know a little bit more about what detail we should go into for our presentation today. So thank you very much. So now you should see a slide that says Farmer Rancher Research and Education Grants. I just want to double check that the slide set transitioned okay from the poll. So if you didn't see that, you could jump on.
Yes, they're there.
Okay, perfect. I thought maybe that transition might have been what locked up the slides last time. So now I'm going to talk about the Farmer Rancher Research and Education Grants. And within this grant program, one or more producers operating a for-profit farm are eligible to apply for this grant. And so we already went over the definition of a producer. One of the producers that's part of the grant, and you can have one or more than one, is the applicant and is going to be fiscally responsible for the money that is provided by USDA through the SARE program and is going to need to do all of the reporting and bookkeeping around those funds, and will need to provide a social security number or a tax ID number in relation to receiving the funds. And that's just really important to understand that there is a fiscal responsibility. Projects also must include a qualified technical advisor that would assist the farmer or group of farmers with the development of on-farm field trials and outreach. And I very specifically say on-farm because this call for proposals is designed for innovative on-farm or on-ranch experiments. And they could be anything related to production. They could also look at value-added products and marketing those value-added products that are made with things that are grown on the farm. It might be something like this slide that you see. This is actually a remote sensing device to look at irrigation needs of a specific crop within a row situation. You might also be looking at organic production. So again, you're looking at sustainable agriculture, and you are looking at on-farm experimentation. So this is the unique part of this program, is that it's about being on the ground, doing hands-on, or what we call applied research, and then educational outreach to other producers and to other professionals that are working with producers. These grants are not scale dependent. You can be, what I mean by that is you can be a very small farm and you can apply, and you can be a very large farm and you can apply. But again, you're looking at increasing the sustainability of your farm or ranch. They're really looking at projects that will advance sustainable agriculture and help producers apply practices that are going to move them on that continuum of sustainability and the development of new knowledge. So it's also important to understand that under this particular call, all the reports, your proposal, only if it's funded, not if it's not funded, but if it's funded, and the related information from your project are held in the public domain so that they are available to other people. So public funds creating information that's important to you as a farmer applicant, but also to other farmers and the field of sustainable agriculture. For this particular call, a technical advisor can be somebody from Cooperative Extension like myself or Lauren, somebody that's working at the county level. Lauren is working at the county level. I work across multiple counties, or a specialist in a specific discipline of agriculture. Could also be a USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service field staff member. It could be a private agricultural consultant from a different firm, and it could also be a nonprofit staff member. One of the key things is that your technical advisor cannot also count as one of the producers involved in your grant. So if your grant is a group of 3 producers, you wanted one of them to be your technical advisor, that would not work. You need to have somebody outside the producers that are doing the on-farm research. And to substantiate their expertise in the area that you're having them advise you, they must submit a resume with your grant application. So if you have any questions about whether or not somebody would be a qualified technical advisor for your project, you definitely would want to talk with them first, and then to reach out to the USDA SARE program, and there's a contact for these types of grants that you can just call on the phone and say, this is who I'm looking at having as my technical advisor, here's their background. Would this be somebody that SARE would see as having the qualifications to advise this project? With the farmer rancher grants, if you have a single producer submitting the proposal, you can get up to $20,000. And if you have 3 or more producers working together on a proposal, you can get up to $25,000. And these projects are expected to run for 1 to 3 years. I wanted to give you a couple examples of farmer rancher projects that have been funded. So Pokey Creek Farm, which is up in the Santa area of North Idaho, received a grant to cultivate and produce value-added elderberry products. As part of their outreach, they did on-farm field days, and they developed a brochure specifically about elderberry production and different products that could be made, and marketing those products within Idaho. Another project that was funded was winter and summer greenhouse production for small-scale growers. This applicant was here in Moscow, Idaho, and they were looking at what vegetable varieties could be grown in an unheated, unlit hoop house here on the Palouse and looking at organic production methods for those crops. And again, with that, they had an on-farm, research was done on-farm, and then people came out to the farm for demonstration throughout the research project to see what was happening in those hoop houses. This is a newly funded project, and it's pretty exciting. The farmer who had this funded, her name is Susan Plugel, and she is looking at the architecture of plants and how that relates to pollinators. So the design of flowers and that plant architecture, what pollinators are attracted to those plants, and then how can they increase native pollinator and beneficial insect diversity on the farm by putting groupings of these plants in different areas on the farm. So this was a project that was funded after we gave this presentation in Moscow last year, and we're really excited to see what the outcomes are going to be. And again, has on-farm research, there's an evaluation component, and then there's going to be a field component where farmers can both come out and see what's going on in the field in terms of the plantings and the pollinators that are attracted to it, but they're also going to put together groups of very affordable plantings that farmers could then plant out in their fields and attract the same pollinators. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the slides off to Lauren, and she is going to talk about the next grant call, Professional Plus Producer.
Yes, thank you. So the second half of this webinar is discussing the other producer grant within SARE, and that is the Professional Plus Producer grant. And the difference between the producer grant that Colette just described is that the professional and producer grant is led by an ag professional. So at least one ag professional is the principal investigator who leads the research and outreach. Now, how you are involved is that a professional and producer grant requires at least 5 independent and separate producers to be a part of the project. Just to note, nonprofit farm operations may participate, but cannot be one of the 5. We can move on to the next slide. As SARE knows and how they want their funds to be used, they want to make sure that farmers are heavily involved in the process of identifying what our sustainable agriculture needs in the farming industry, and then also implementing those sustainable agriculture needs. So the agricultural professional who leads this type of grant has to have the capacity to conduct the research as well as the outreach activities. And secondly, they're not only assisting the 5 producers that are on the project, but they're also going to help disseminate that information to other producers in the surrounding area. Now, an ag professional is similar to the technical advisor that we defined earlier. So that can include an extension faculty member or specialist, an NRCS field staff, a nonprofit staff member. It can include a soil water conservation district individual, and any other type of ag professional that shows the qualifications needed to conduct the research as well as the outreach component. Next slide. So the professional and producer grant, how you are involved as potentially one of the 5 farmers, is that you're involved from start to finish. You're not only helping the professional advise them on how best to plan, design, implement the research component, but you'll also be part of the educational outreach. Now, research shows that farmers are more willing and learn best from other farmers. So SARE wants to identify champion farmers from these types of grants to be a part of the outreach. So that includes doing presentations, being the champion in your community to spread that information to other farmers, and showing them how you implemented this particular practice and what it did for your operation. Did it make you more profitable? Did it make you more sustainable? Did it open new market opportunities for you? You want to be that voice for SARE to say, here's what we did, and here how it can be valuable and implemented on your farm. So professional and producer grants are also on-farm research experiments or on-ranch experiments. So they involve the on-the-ground research as well as the education component. As we mentioned throughout this presentation, SARE wants to make sure that the information and any type of sustainable agriculture practices that are identified from these funded proposals, that information is disseminated to other farmers. The end goal also must advance sustainable agriculture. If you're thinking of submitting a proposal or being part of a proposal, you want to make sure that you're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. You want to make sure that you're answering some sort of useful question that isn't already identified. So you want to be able to advance that technique, that innovative practice within your type of operation. The practices also need to be adopted by other producers, so it can't be so unique that it's not applicable to many farmers. It may be applicable to certain types of farmers that grow that particular crop, and that is valuable. The proposal and the project needs to deliver new knowledge. As I mentioned, it needs to identify a missing gap in the literature or the industry and fill that with this proposal. And all the reports and materials would be available on the public domain. So these professional and producer grants are up to $50,000, and the project vary from 1 to 3 years in length. So I want to identify one example that was funded a couple years ago, and this proposal was a really great example of filling a gap of information that was needed by many producers in our state. This particular project was titled Extension of Local Food Production in Idaho Using High Tunnel Technology. So some of these proposals can come fruition out of a number of ways. For example, an agriculture professional may have identified a need based on their interaction with other farmers and realizing that farmers need to know this information. And so they're going to lead the charge with writing a professional and producer grant. And with that, during that process, they'll identify the 5 producers that they want to work with. So by you being on this call, you're identifying yourself as a potential person who wants to be networked in to some of these proposals, or at least involved in some capacity, or perhaps being that champion who goes out to do a farmer rancher grant on your own with a technical advisor to help consult with in terms of making your project successful. So this particular project was done both ways. It was identified that high tunnels were a need in Idaho, and many producers throughout the state were interested in using high tunnels to extend the season. So a team of U of I Extension faculty members worked on this proposal and identified 5 experienced high tunnel growers to work with. Another thing that made this proposal very competitive and how it rose to the top in order to be funded was that the research was spread out throughout the state. So the 5 farmers were located throughout Idaho, in the northern, southwestern, and south central part of the state. And that was really valuable because it allowed them to answer on-farm research questions in terms of each location in Idaho has different environmental conditions, whether that's extreme rain, high winds, or snow loads. So the team was able to test the high tunnel technology under different environmental constraints at these various locations. And they were also able to test certain crop varieties that are going to work under these high tunnel systems that are commonly grown in these areas. And this was a 3-year project. So year 1 was getting the material and setting up the high tunnel technology on the 5 individual farms. Year 2 was monitoring over the season to see how those high tunnels did and performed under the various weather conditions and with certain crops, and made tweaks along the way. And then the 3rd year was the outreach component, where they took the information they learned from this project to spread the information through field tours and publications to help other growers adopt high tunnel technology if it meets their needs and allows them to extend their season for production. So the three project components were research on high tunnel design with the objective to improve structural integrity under conditions of high winds and snow loads. So that was one of their research questions. And then secondly was to identify profitable crops and crop cultivars for use in Idaho under these high tunnel production systems. And then lastly, to make sure that these practices are useful and adopted by other farmers, is to educate and provide outreach on local food production using high tunnels through field days and publications. Another component of this grant was also cost. So part of the outreach was identifying what would it cost for a farmer to implement this practice. And that's a useful thing as you start to develop a proposal, is to identify how you, if you were a farmer, how would this be useful to you, and what information would you be seeking the most? And so farmers on this call, you provide a really valuable lens to the ag professional as they're putting this proposal together and actually doing the on-farm research. You help identify what information is going to be most useful for your operation, and those need to be similar to other farmers that are in your situation. I wanted to identify a couple other projects. Luckily, well, you're in luck, Idaho actually has not submitted a lot of professional and producer grants, and so we don't have a lot of examples of these. This one, I believe, was funded in 2015, so it's been a couple years since an Idaho team has submitted for one, so that often can help. If the state has not received one in a while, our proposal can rise to the top. But I wanted to showcase one in Montana, just because it's a similar region. This one was titled, "Are Feedlot-Based Performance Cattle Limiting Ecological Services for Rangeland Ecosystems in Northern Mixed Grass Prairies?" So this particular project was obviously looking at feedlot industry and cattle, which is a huge agricultural component to Montana's economics, and then also looking at having that ecological question as to how are these feedlots impacting the ecological surroundings, and then what practices can we change to improve the ecological services that these feedlots could potentially provide to this type of climate. I wanted to highlight one more that's a professional and producer grant, and it was titled Madison County Healthy Soil Initiative. Now, this principal investigator was a Soil Water Conservation District staff member in Madison County. And what he did and his producers is they all implemented no-till and cover crops on their farms in this 3-year project. And then they did a series of outreach through field tours, workshops, and webinars to educate other farmers in Madison County to help adopt these soil health practices. And then the third example I wanted to highlight, this is actually a farmer grant, so similar to what Colette spoke about, but this one was titled Goat Meat is Great. And this was funded here in the Hagerman Valley. And although these grants can be up to $20,000, this particular producer only requested $7,000. And so I wanted to identify that sometimes those smaller grants have a better chance of getting funded, because often the grant team or review panel, will review the grants and fund a number of them at the full price of $20,000. And then there might be some money still left in the budget. And so some of these smaller grants have a better chance of being funded because A, they were good proposals, and then B, it fits within the budget. So this was a great example of a farmer who had a team of other farmers where they were trying to expand the market for goat meat in Idaho. And so they did a series of taste testing events. They beefed up some social media, and they produced a website as well. So the end goal was to do a campaign on goat meat and increase the consumer demand for goat meat, since we do have a number of small goat meat producers in our state. So I just wanted to highlight that some of those smaller values of less than 10,000 can be easily funded due to the budget having a little bit of remaining money in it. So speaking of budget, as a producer, you need to know what you can use the funds for. So in general, the compensation is for the field research and the education activities for the project. So that can include sampling, any type of lab analysis, any type of surveys that you may need to do. It can be included for project materials and supplies. So for example, the high tunnel system, a bulk of that budget was used to be able to purchase the supplies needed to create those high tunnel systems on those 5 farms. It can be used for small tools and equipment. It cannot be used for any equipment that exceeds $5,000 for one piece of equipment. It could be used to fund the field days, field tours. It can be used to print materials, or it can be used to create a web page, or for example with the elderberry, some sort of publication or material on elderberries so that you can educate and do a campaign with consumers on that particular product. It can be used for travel, and that can be for you to travel to a conference perhaps to learn more about your particular question. It can be used to...
We just lost your sound, Lauren. So Lauren, we can't hear you right now.
optimal management intensive practices for his particular operation. So it's very specific.
So I'm sorry, everyone. I think something is happening with Lauren's connection and her sound is going in and out. So Lauren, I'm going to let you know that your sound is no longer working. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward with the presentation. So if anyone cannot hear me, please let me know so that we would know that that was not on Lauren's side, but in the entire webinar program. So as Lauren said, you can use these funds for out-of-town and local travel. If you have to hire some type of specialized labor, specifically again related to the field research and education, so it can't be general labor on your farm. If there's some extra labor that you as the producer need to do in order to do this specific project, and it's going to take extra time, sometimes that can be funded, and then other ag professional services. So for both of these grants that we've talked about, the farmer rancher and the professional plus producer, the grant timeline is that proposals are due on November 28th, 2018 at noon Mountain Standard Time. And so these are online proposals, which is nice in terms of submitting them. In January, there will be a technical review and recommendations made. So there is a large gathering of experts in the field of sustainable agriculture, producers, as well as ag professionals, and they'll review the proposals. And then they're going to make recommendations to Western SARE's Administrative Council, which will meet in February and make the selections on what projects are funded. In April of 2019, you'd be informed about whether or not your proposal was funded. And if it was funded, the funds would be dispersed in summer of 2019. So now we wanted to know if you have any specific questions about those different grant calls and whether or not you have some ideas. And you can either type these into the question box, or if you look on the dashboard and there's a way that you can raise your hand, there's a little box, we can unmute you and you can actually talk with us directly about your project idea. So are there any ideas that you have that you'd like to discuss or questions about the grant calls? You might also have a question about how to find a technical assistance provider. So if you have any questions about that, go ahead and type them in. One thing that you can do if you have a project idea is that you could go ahead and give myself or Lauren a call, and we'd be happy to talk with you about that idea and help you identify who a technical assistance provider would be. We do have one question from Shailene. She says, we have some ideas about our timber and disease, and I have an idea about who I could use for an expert. So that's great. So in that case, you would be looking at applying for the Farmer Rancher grant with your technical assistance provider. And those grant applications, as I mentioned, are actually online in your, and I'll show you that website, but I included them in the handouts. So if you have had a chance to download those, you'll be able to see the full call. And Shailene is saying that you need some help because of the amount of land that you have. So that would be great. And, you know, with all the forest fires that we've been having and how disease and down timber has been playing into those, I think sustainable management would be a really important thing to look at and an appropriate idea for a farmer rancher grant. Okay, we have a few more minutes on this webinar, so I'm going to go ahead and show you some resources that can help you put your grant together. So this is an image of Western SARE's website, and the address of the website is at the bottom. And as you see, they have a whole bunch of different types of documents to help you put your proposal together and explain how the budget sheets are put together and what you need to do. They also have a Farmer Field Day Toolkit, which you could download, and if you were going to do a field day, you would be able to go through that toolkit and identify some of the things that you might need for your project to implement that field day, and you might want to put some of those materials and supplies into your budget. Here is the online application system, which will be very straightforward for you to walk through. And as I mentioned, you can always call and talk to the Western SARE program about your ideas or any questions you have about your application, and that's the phone number right there and the email. So over here is where you can learn about projects that have been funded, like the ones that Lauren and I were discussing. So there's full project reports, and you can search those by state or by subject matter. So for instance, if you are interested in doing a timber proposal, you can search all the things that have been funded in the past by the type of grant and related to timber, so you can have a better idea of what has been funded. And so there's full project reports. There's also summaries by year and a lot of handouts. So when you come to this page, this is the top of the page, and what you would scroll down through the page is to see all the different calls that Western SARE has. You'd find the one that you're interested in, click on that, and that would take you to download the actual grant proposal guidelines. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that Western SARE has this free publication online, How to Conduct Research on Your Farm or Ranch. And that might be a great thing for you also to download, so you can think through your on-farm research project and how you might do your replications and your demonstration. You can find that if you type into this URL, westernsare.org, and do in the search bar, if you just put on-farm research, you'll go right to this publication. On the Cultivating Success website, which is just cultivatingsuccess.org, you'll find links to our upcoming webinars, our Idaho Farm Link program, but also under this resource tab, we have a number of resources that are available that might be helpful. If you're looking for a particular resource and you're having difficulty finding it, please just go to the Contact Us key and go ahead and send us an email, and that will go to our program coordinator, Amanda Snyder, and she'll definitely link you in with the resources that you need, or you could email Lauren and I directly. This is where this webinar and our other webinars are posted once they've been recorded, and where you'll find the list of upcoming webinars. This fall, we have 2 additional webinars scheduled. One is on the Idaho Farm Link program, and the other is on direct marketing. And we also have on this website the recorded webinars that were offered last spring on a variety of topics. So you can watch them anytime, or if you'd like to refer anyone to watch the webinar, you're thinking about maybe doing a grant proposal with multiple farmers, you can send them back to watch this webinar recording so that they understand more about the SARE program. And finally, we really want to thank you for participating in today's webinar. And there will be a post-webinar survey that will pop up just after the webinar ends. It'll probably take you less than 5 minutes to complete. We'd really appreciate getting your feedback on today's webinar, and we appreciate your patience with our technological glitches. It always seems like there's something out there happening in that netherworld of technology when we do a webinar. So we definitely appreciate your patience, and we thank you for joining us today. Again, the handouts are available in the side pane. If you haven't downloaded them yet, you might want to do that before we conclude the webinar. And if you have any trouble downloading the webinar handouts, just let me know. I'm happy to email them to you directly. My email is on the screen, as is Lauren, and we look forward to working with you in the future on hopefully a SARE producer program grant. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.